welcome to the Joint Alumni Affairs and Cal State Fullerton's Politics, Administration, and Justice and Fullerton College program on what to expect from the 2024 elections, which we will follow up at the Fullerton Public Library on November the 18th with what just happened. Right. So we have a great panel tonight. I'm going to allow everybody to introduce themselves. And I thought, my name is Scott Spitzer. I'm a professor of political science here at Cal State Fullerton. And my research focuses on American politics, American political history, the presidency, social upper politics, media and politics. I'll ask everybody when you speak, just please introduce yourself. My first question, so we're going to do this in a roundtable style, and I'm going to ask a series of questions that any of us will be able to answer, and we'll open it up to questions after that. So our first question is, for those in the audience who are watching the election, in the first couple of hours after the polls close, let's say, right, what would you be looking at and as you're listening, watching, scrolling, and why would you be looking at those things? Anybody want to take that?
I can go. I'm Matt Jarvis. I am an associate professor of political science at Cal State Fullerton. The first few hours, not much. So the first polls close. The first poll closing is Kentucky. They have a weird half-hour close time. And that's at 6:30 Eastern. So it's like 3:30 in the afternoon out here on the West Coast. And then you get like nothing for a while. So yeah, you first see Kentucky for some reason. And then you see the rest of them. The first ones that we'll see, the first clues to watch, you're going to want to look at Virginia, Florida, and Ohio. In Virginia, you're looking at a couple of congressional races. If the Republican doesn't win in the 2nd district, it's a bad night for the Republicans. If the Democrat doesn't win in the 7th district, it's going to be a bad night for the Democrats. In Florida, you're looking at the presidential race. Trump is expected to win Florida, but if it's close, if they don't call Florida relatively early, then that'll be a sign that Harris is in for a good night. You're also looking at the Senate race and districts 13 and 27. All of those are expected to be Republican victories, but if they don't get called early, that's a signal that the Republicans aren't doing well. And then in Ohio, again, President Trump is expected to win Ohio, so that's another one there. The Senate is right now a toss-up, so that one you'll actually watch to see the actual result, because it will affect the balance of power in the Senate. And then districts 1, 9, and 13 are all expected to be Democratic wins. If any of those are taking a long time to be called, you're probably looking at a long night for the Democrats. Michigan's a little slower in counting than the other states are, but Ohio, Virginia, and Florida were almost essentially done counting, or at least in the 90th percentile in terms of votes counted by 8 o'clock.
Are we going to get what they used to call the red mirage and then the blue wave? Are we going to have that this year? You guys think that? And, which for our audience members, that the initial sense is that, because the early voters, that the people who vote in person are going to be more likely to be Republican, but the mail-in voters are more likely to be Democrats. So it takes a little while before we start to get the counts of those mail-in votes. But when people vote in person, the count goes right away. So that in the last few elections, we've seen that, that illusion that, the Republicans are way ahead, and then the Democrats close the gap. And then there's a lot of concern that, there's something nefarious going on here. You think we're going to see some of that kind of stuff happening?
It's hard to say. So I'm Jody Bull, and I teach political science at Fullerton College, and my focus is on local and state. So I'll be talking more about that. But I do think 2024 is hard to compare to 2020 because of COVID. Because Trump and the Republicans were telling people not to vote by mail in 2020. They have reversed that and actually discovered that messaging to have people vote early is a remarkably good idea. So 68 million people have already voted as of today. You know, when you look at the presidential election of 2020, 155 million total voted, 81 million for Biden and the remainder for Trump. So that's a huge portion that's already, but a lot of those are Republicans. So like Matt was saying, you know, some of it depends on how the states count.
Sure.
And so that will matter, how quickly we find out. Obviously, what we're talking about are projections when there's a big enough gap, when there's a big enough margin to call it clearly. The actual votes take 30 days to verify. So we're not talking about official numbers. So yes, on some level, those early states are overwhelmingly Republican. You know, Kentucky is always the first, and it's a little disappointing because it's ruby red and not a whole lot of surprise. I'm going to be looking for Florida definitely for voter turnout. They have two questions on the ballot, amendments on the ballot for marijuana and abortion, which seems to be galvanizing people to come out and vote. And so I'm looking at turnout numbers. I'm looking at the gender gap of women.
Yes.
Post-Dobbs, women have shown up in massive ways. Abortion is on the ballot in a number of states, and so I'm looking to see in those states if voter turnout is higher than perhaps expected. I'm curious about Georgia, one of the early votes, North Carolina, all of those states that have had, you know, horrific damage from the hurricanes, and they're in the middle of cleanup and still trying to vote. So that's kind of what I'm looking at.
From what I understand, North Carolina and Georgia, we may know fairly early, like before midnight our time, maybe the outcome of those two electoral college. Not officially, but.
It depends. The Helene damage in inner North Carolina is substantial enough to make it impossible. There will be counties that will be showing up on those maps as pure gray because they will simply will not have results. So there's going to be portions of I expect North Carolina to be a delayed call this cycle because of Helene. Georgia fared better. And the population areas that hit more by Helene have been able to come out of it more. So it's mountainous areas in western North Carolina, where I-45? The North Wicklow?
I-40 was, well, more than one, I-40 was completely.
Yeah, and the estimate from the Department of Transportation is 2026, we're gonna have this, right? I mean, that's just cut off from a lot of the ability to drive those votes. There are a number of states that have requirements. California, for example, is one of those, where if they're transporting the physical record of the thing to a centralized counting place, it has to be done by a sheriff's deputy. And there are states that have requirements like that, and they don't necessarily have helicopters or planes to do that. So driving around is literally an exercise that's going to take 12 more hours than it did 2 years ago in North Carolina, parts of eastern Tennessee.
What do you think the first swing state that we're going to really kind of get a sense which direction is going in terms of presidential? Anyone got a clue about which swing state might know the outcome first, or we're just not going to know these? Sounds like
Michigan.
Yeah, because Rob Robinson, teaching research courts and also teaching American government and presidency. Both Wisconsin and Pennsylvania have laws set up to delay counting. And that was done during 2020, pretty much to create the portrayal of an early lead for Republicans, because Donald Trump asked them to, because it would make it look like he was winning and it would give them a reason to cry foul if the Democrats caught up, which they did. Those states did not change those rules. Having said that, like Jody mentioned, we don't really know what's going to happen in those states. So I would not be surprised if you didn't see the same kind of red wave in those states. But because Michigan doesn't have that kind of slow counting, we might, and to me, that's probably Harris's most favorable state in the blue wall. So if she's behind or losing there, I think it bodes ill for the rest of that region. If she's doing well or exceeding expectations, those states don't move together, but they're not fully separate either. So that would be my first, I guess, unless you think, I don't really think Florida's a state. So
yeah.
Well, yeah. Michelle Arsenault, political science professor and alum of Cal State Fullerton. Go class of 1990, political science. But I think that's all right. And I definitely agree with Jody. And I think the thing that I'm going to be watching for is Florida and the abortion proposition in particular, and how many women that has brought out. And frankly, I hate to say it out loud, but that's what I'm looking at is women's turnout right now. And in Michigan and in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania, it's been high. And I think that is telling us something.
And Michigan will also be a little tough to watch. It's been in the last few cycles, Wayne County, Detroit, has been the slowest in Michigan to count.
Right.
And the state is basically red except for that.
Yeah.
So Michigan will start off in the early counting. It's going to look, Trump has won Michigan when they first start reporting the results at 8 o'clock. He will be ahead. And he's going to be ahead largely for, I mean, if he's not ahead at 11 o'clock, it's been a really good night for Harris. The folks who are going to be calling this from those decision centers are having to take into account these patterns, these red mirages and stuff like that. And in Michigan, it's particularly susceptible to this sort of red mirage, particularly when you look at the map. Just in terms of space, it's red and blue.
Atlanta's also very slow.
Yeah, and Atlanta's has been slow for the last few elections.
And I think it's really important that people are watching this and people in our audience understand that, because we're all on the edge of the razor right now. You know, we're all thinking, you know, this could go. And for us to just to remember, the voting stopped when the polls closed. So we're just counting. We're just like certifying, counting, and we're figuring out what actually happened. We're not actually, it's not somebody's ahead or behind. It's just we're counting votes, and we haven't counted all of them. And that's for me, that's the better way to think about it. So you mentioned the women's votes, which are absolutely essential. You know, there's a huge gender gap according to polling, and most people are saying, most opinion analysts are saying, it's likely to be larger now than it was in 2020, which was the largest it was before in presidential voting. Democrats having a huge advantage with women voters over Republicans. I wanted to actually, since we're at a university, start by thinking about another group, which is young voters. And there's been a lot of talk about young voters, 18 to 34-year-olds. Just here in California, where there's a number of swing districts right there in Orange County, congressionally, most of the ballots that have already been reported have been older people. So the question, let's turn to our expert on local politics a little bit. What do you think about the youth group vote here in Orange County or in California more generally?
Yeah, I definitely think if college students were choosing when an election would be, it would not be the first Tuesday in November. 18th century agrarian farmers perhaps should not be dominating, dictating our schedule. But 18 to 34-year-olds in California, in Orange County, are the largest age cohort that we have. And so they could dominate elections. They don't turn out. They haven't turned out in the primary in 2024. In 2022, both elections, we saw 74% of all ballots cast in Orange County in California were cast by 50 and older.
Wow.
So decisions are being made that might not be what young people want. And the ballot is long in California. We've got 10 statewide measures that are confusing and hundreds of millions of dollars are spent trying to confuse you. Local measures make it hard to know. There's low information elections there on the ballot, and so I understand why non-political science professors might not be jumping on October 10th to fill out their ballot and return it, like I am. However, I think it is important to understand the power that young people have. And that is something that I think we're seeing more in states that are swing states, that are really marketing to young people, that are begging young people to vote. And I don't see that same outreach in Orange County. I don't see that same outreach in California. It can be, I think, a letdown to know the outcome of the California vote, to know that there are 22 million voters in California, 10 million are registered Democrats, 5 million are registered Republicans. The remainder are either NPP, no party preference, or one of those little minor political parties that exist. And so, you know, I'm not going to be looking at 805 to check who won the United States Senate race in California. Something has gone horribly wrong if Steve Garvey is somehow ahead.
There's no result in 801.
So, you know, that's, I think, a little bit difficult to sell people on. I think our civic education in high school doesn't do a very good job of teaching local politics, where, you know, in Brea in 2020, we had a school board race that ended in a tie. It took 3 weeks to know that there was no decision in that race. And I had my entire class on Zoom watching as 2 candidates rolled dice to determine the outcome.
Literally.
Is that in their state, in the city charter?
It's in the city charter, a game of chance. And I looked it up in Anaheim because the first election with Jose Moreno and Jordan Brandon in the city council for Anaheim on election night, it was a tie. And I was frantically trying to find out what to do. It just had a game of chance. It ended up not to be relevant because eventually there were a couple, you know, tens of votes that determined that outcome. But you can't say that your vote doesn't matter.
Yeah.
When during COVID closures, the school board is determined by the roll of the dice. What if Placentia or Melinda had been rolled? Decided by the roll of the dice.
And those were really close.
Those were really close.
So can you explain that to our viewing audience and also to the, and by the way, this is a great pitch for our ballot ball, which has been up and running, and Cal State Fullerton right now is in first place among the CSUs, and second place statewide. I heard today, midday, that we are just behind Berkeley.
That's amazing.
We're ahead of Stanford. So we need to keep doing that, and you guys, but more importantly, if you're watching this and you're a student, you're a young person, we're all young at heart, please vote, please vote.
That's incredibly generous and untrue.
But anyway, getting back to that, I see you this.
Yeah, definitely, and we have in California same-day registration where you can register to vote all the way up till Tuesday at 7:59 p.m. Go to a vote center and you can register in person and vote that day. So, and tell them you're at Cal State Fullerton. So the local school board, Placentia or Melinda, in 2020, it was the first time they had district elections on the ballot. There were multiple candidates in each of those races. All you need in those local races for city council, for school district, is a plurality. First past the post, the one with the most votes wins. And so Leandra Blades won her seat with 32% of the vote. 68% had voted for somebody else. She and 2 other candidates won that race in 2020 and have taken Placentia or Melinda to an extreme majority, banned CRT in such an incredibly vague and inexact way that the College Board had to issue a ruling that said, we don't believe you can teach AP classes because we think you have just banned talking about civil rights and slavery. So Cal State Fullerton's teacher education program decided not to send student teachers because of the chilling effect that that board has had. They've been firing administrators, young teachers don't apply. They've had a massive problem as a result of that election 4 years ago. And any one of them could have been determined with just 1,000 more people voting.
And
I would,
go ahead, please.
I would add three things real quick to the younger voters. Number one, I think presidential race does get most of the visibility, and the electoral college, correctly, unfortunately, leads a lot of people to believe that your vote in California is not terribly relevant. It's true. It's not like the patriotic thing to say. I encourage everyone to vote, but Harris is not in California. Second thing I would say is that a good chunk of young OC and young California are also Asian and Latino voters who vote at lower rates than Black and white voters. Reasons for that are complicated. I'm not sure I actually know the answer. Could be having parents who are not as fully integrated in the political system because of recent immigration. Could be some other, maybe language barriers in the family, but those rates are low, and I think that's one of the things that tease out is what is it about Orange County that is young, and what is it about those demographics. If Latinos voted at the rate they existed, they would have even more political power than they should. The third thing I would say is something I want to look at. I do think you have potentially a number of otherwise, what's the word we would use, marginal voter, someone who might not show up, might show up, is that a fair term, marginal voter?
Call them low propensity.
Low propensity voters. I think there will be low propensity young women who will vote because of abortion rights. I think one of the things I've been watching for is how many, especially in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and other swing states. Because I think the Harris campaign has bet and focused more on women, and the Trump campaign going on Joe Rogan and doing some other things of that nature, Jake Paul, is trying to focus more on young men. And one of the challenges for Trump there is I think young women vote.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that Trump's going to lose by any means, but I think it does. If you're choosing genders, I would choose the one that votes.
But our young voters can make a huge difference in the shape of our economies, right? Because we have a couple of swing districts right here in Orange County. I mean, you guys have any sense of what's happening in either the Michelle Steele race or the former Katie Porter, the David and Scott Bauer race? Any sense of that? That looks like
it looks like the same
David.
trend. Yeah, it looks like the same trend of low voter turnout for 18 to 34-year-olds. More Asian voters in that district, Congressional District 45, that is a third Asian, and was drawn that way. In California, we have an independent redistricting commission, and so our districts are competitive and Congress may be the control of the House of Representatives may be determined by California. And in a really close election could be determined by Orange County. And so I think that young people understanding that if they want legislative outcomes, they need to vote for the House of Representatives. And we have that opportunity in Orange County to be determinative. Both Congressional District 47, that's the former Katie Porter, Dave Min, Scott Baugh race, and Michelle Steele versus Derek Tran. Those trends are across the board with young people not showing up yet.
Yeah.
Yet. Election day is Tuesday. Come on in. Yeah, vote.
Yeah, well, I just back to the young people and especially the young women. I mean, first of all, what I would say is, the thing that is, I think, most keeping young people and Californians in general from voting is the Electoral College and this idea that we don't matter. And I think particularly young people, because everything is about a presidential election, and they don't know about these congressional races, and they don't understand how important it is. They don't understand that actually this is where we can make the difference and where our voting would matter a lot. And I think that's a tragedy, and I think the Electoral College is a tragedy, and that's what I would say on that. The young women vote, the other thing I would add is not only are they mobilized, not only are they mobilized by the reproductive rights and bodily autonomy questions, they are now, particularly the youngest voters, are being introduced via TikTok to a lot of things, including the Access Hollywood tape and things that they may not have known about Trump as a candidate, particularly because in 2016 was the Access Hollywood thing. These kids may have been 15 they're now able to vote.
10.
And yeah, or right, or less, right?
Or not.
Yeah.
And they are on TikTok and they are sharing it and they are horrified. And I suspect it's not just young women, frankly, that might be horrified by that. So it's like, it all counts.
Shelley, I think you bring up really two big categories that I think we should be looking at. One is the quality or lack of quality in the information flow in this electoral cycle and how that is shaping up our voting patterns and what we can learn from that. And the second thing is sort of just the structure, right? The electoral college is just one piece of it. The Senate map, right, which is one of the reasons right now, like the third of the senators that are up for re-election, that the Democrats are defending way more Senate incumbents than in very challenging areas than the Republicans at a time when the electorate is so polarized. So, you know, I just want to open that conversation up. What do you guys think both about, you know, what's happening in terms of information flow and how people are being brought into the electorate, not just young people, but all sorts of groups. Any thoughts about those things? I know those are giant categories.
I think it's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare.
I think we are increasingly polarized in our choice of news and how we perceive it. I think social media is increasingly the place where young people get their news, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but the quality. I mean, so there's a choice you make. If you rely on, you know, what people might call mainstream media, the LA Times, Washington Post, you might not like their coverage or agree with it or hate editorial decisions, but you're probably not getting conspiratorial nonsense. There's some gatekeeping. That gatekeeping is not always good. Think back to like the Vietnam War or something. What might have been shown, gatekeeping can be harmful. But then what you also get with social media is kind of a fire hose of what Professor Hassan down in Irvine, law professor, calls cheap speech. It's so easy to create stuff now that means, you know, TikTok has a lot of good information and a lot of other stuff. And so does Instagram, and so does Twitter. And so it's I think misinformation is particularly hard. And now that we have the ability to doctor photos and videos fairly convincingly, especially if you want to believe something that isn't true is true, like you don't like a candidate and you see them in a scandal, you go, oh, look at this. And so it's a mess that's going to get worse before it gets better. So I'm pretty negative on, I think that some of the problems we might see after the election, for example, will be the result of misinformation. I think just today, in fact, the Defense Department or the NSA or somebody said that video of purported voter fraud in Georgia was put together by Russian operatives. It's not great.
You know,
And that's before we talk about the news avoiders.
Yeah.
You know, by some estimates, 48% of the American public is actively avoiding news.
sure.
And that's horrifying. And I think
For their mental health.
well, it's probably better for their mental health.
But I mean, I think you put your finger right on it, which is to say that even the mainstream news, which has been gatekeeping, trying to compete with this barrage of, you know, just hyperbolic, you know, crazy stuff coming out in the social media, is trying to be dramatic a lot of times, and they're deeply polarized as well. So, it is. I will say, what do you guys think about this? That some of the youngest of our users of social media are the most sophisticated users. They're the ones who, they may not be sophisticated about politics and about government, but they may be very sophisticated about social media and being able to detect fake news and you know, AI generated things much more easily than someone as old as me.
I think able to and going to are two different things. Basically, the plague of misinformation and disinformation, what you call it, works. The reason this is being done is it works.
Yes.
Simply put, human beings really suffer from confirmation bias. They really want to hear things that agree with what they already thought. It makes you feel better. It makes you feel like you were right in the first place. So the way our algorithms work on social media is to show you the things that engage with, which is either to post the things you hate and then you and all your friends get to feel the sense of camaraderie over hating the same thing. Or it shows you things you like and you like it together with these same like-minded folks. It's really prone to this. So I don't think that then you combine the fact that basically the older you get, the more likely you are to have experienced more of the neutral, older gatekeeping media and to go, wait a minute, what is this? More likely you are to experience a number of various disinformation things that happen. Call it catfishing, call it whatever you want. At the end of the day, there is something to be said for that experience. And so I think that a young voter mixed with, or young people mixed with no gatekeeping is a very, very volatile mix.
Yeah, I wouldn't put young people necessarily at a disadvantaged elderly. You can do a stereotypical Facebook grandparent thing, which there's a lot of proof, honestly.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge for young people, for digital natives, they're savvier about technology, but they lack the background knowledge to be able to tell truth from fiction. So it's not that they're not better at, they might be more quick to recognize that someone has 6 fingers and like 2 eyeballs or 2 left eyes or something, and like, oh, that's not right. But if you tell them a fact about the world, they're less likely to have the basis that someone who's 40 might have to say, no, there's no way that can actually happen. And I know that because I've been alive a little longer. So I think they're disadvantaged because of their life experience.
Yeah. Thank you for saying what I'm saying.
All right, well, a couple of things I wanted to also bring up. There's been a lot of talk about how traditional voting blocks are not going to be, that there may be some departures from patterns, particularly among African American voters and Latino voters. There's been a lot of talk about this. And I'm just wondering what people are hearing and what people are thinking. I know, Matt, we've talked about this before, when we look at the poll numbers that suggest, there may be some Black voters or Latino voters that are less likely to vote Democrat and more likely to vote Republican, particularly Black men and Latino men, that the poll is, the number of people in the survey that are Black and Latino is so small that to generalize based on these outcomes seems really almost like misinformation in and of itself.
Yeah, so the general rule of thumb is not to trust almost anything that talks about subgroups unless it was designed to capture those subgroups. You're fine on gender because we're roughly 50-50 and you're going to get a decent enough size population there. But if you get into anything that's really, in a sense, that much smaller, it's really tough. So your typical poll has about 1,000 respondents. That's usually where the payoff of the statistics ends up being, again, it's too expensive to get the statistics more accurate to do it. So roughly speaking, if you do a survey with 1,000 people, you should be off by plus or minus 3%. This is assuming everyone's picking up the phone. With response rates having gone into the toilet, we're single-digit response rates. That's even tougher to say, and they're having to do a lot more weighting and sort of putting their thumb on the scale about it. When you get to that, what I remember is back in 2016, there was a poll, and it was doing a rolling pool of folks. And every 7 days, Black support for Trump in this poll skyrocketed because he liked Trump. And it doesn't really get, because a rolling poll where you're contacting the people every week, that's really expensive in the first place. So you're not getting the hugest hit. You're not going to talk to 1,000 people every day for 7 days and then recontact them every week for months. They were talking to hundreds. And their black sample, a population of the United States, it's around, 15%. But when you get to any sub-state or something, it can be significantly smaller. It was the guy. It was a guy who was a Trump fan. That doesn't mean that black people were huge Trump fans. It means this guy was, and he happened to be in the sample. So, yeah, I would take some of that with a grain of salt. That said, you get a lot of polls showing the same thing. They're not going to have the same guy. He's not taking all the polls. So I do think there is something to it, and I think it's gone underanalyzed by folks. I think it's largely tied into the educational realignment that has happened since 2016. So I think it's tapping into that. We know that increasingly women are more likely to go to and graduate from college than men. And I think it's particularly pronounced amongst Latino and African Americans. So I think that some of the effect they're seeing, I don't think analysts have parsed it out enough. I think there's also an education effect going on there. And so I think what you're having is high school educated Latinos and African Americans going for Trump because that education effect that really emerged as strong as it did in 16 was then reinforced by 2020 and is really now a new sort of realigning factor. There are books being written about how we are now polarized by our levels of education, which you couldn't write that book 10 years ago because it simply wasn't true.
Yeah, just let the building. You can get it. Yes, I think there's some degree of racial depolarization taking place. I think you're 100% right. I think on the education front, a lot of the swing states may come down to, will Harris gain more white, college-educated, independent, modern Republicans than she loses in blue-collar, especially male people of color. So I think that's one of the big questions we'll be looking at. I don't think you have to look at polls, though, to look at these shifts. You can just look at vote totals, vote margins for Democrats. Obama was kind of a unicorn. It was like 2008, so hard comparison. But then becoming more varied, more support. You're getting more back to what George W. Bush was doing in 2004. And so I think what's happening in some places is, particularly Latinos, you see this in South Texas, they're beginning to vote more like the people around them, whoever they are, regardless of ethnicity. So if you're a rural Texas Latino and race becomes less important to you, you especially see this in people who are third, fourth plus generation. They behave like a rural white person because that's their community basically. Whereas if you're a college educated young Latino in LA, it's probably you become more like other kind of young Democrats. So I feel more comfortable about that for Latinos. I'm not sure what's going on with African Americans, which has all been kind of different in how they're able to integrate and how they're treated by that political history. But I think you are seeing that, and I think I imagine something similar will happen with the Asian community as well.
We've seen it a little in the Asian community in Orange County where, young organizing groups actually kind of went out for get out the vote efforts to say to young Vietnamese voters, you need to cancel out your grandparents' vote who are just watching the Vietnamese TV 24/7 and getting lies and, really hyperbolic, conservative, anti-communist rhetoric that worked really well in the 1970s and 80s, and young people in that community are less likely to. And so, I think to Matt's point of these subgroups are really important to understand and to tease out. And so when you have a Latino poll, you can see those subgroups more effectively and not a monolith. And I know, Cal State Fullerton and Fullerton College both invited Mike Madrid to talk about the Latino century that I would really recommend people looking at for more detail on this. And I think it also matters how the campaigns have been going after those voters. The mainstream media or the legacy media that we've seen have fewer ratings. And so these campaigns have been going after podcasts and the bromosphere of, I have had to learn people that I didn't want to know, like I had no interest in knowing who Theo Vaughn was or Aiden Ross.
Not that
And
Andrew
suddenly, you know, that hyper masculinity is appealing, and I think Nikki Haley was really right to say, I don't know that you're expanding your base. And so, you know, the Madison Square Garden rally that was, you know, so hate-filled and not really talking about what a lot of women are interested in. And so that reinforces the gender gap that's already there. The reason the marketing and campaigning is going after it is because that divide is there for all the reasons we have talked about, but then you're reinforcing. You know, I had never heard of Call Her Daddy podcast, that I'm suddenly trying to figure out what that is and why you want to go on it. Oh, it's the second most popular podcast in the country. Okay, now I understand why you might, for Kamala Harris, spend that time to sit down and talk. But they are, as we've seen with Joe Rogan interviewing both Trump and Vance, not journalists. So it is a very friendly environment, and that's nothing new. You know, we got Bill Clinton going on Arsenio Hall back in the day to seem cool with a saxophone. So this isn't new. It's simply a new iteration and the new media landscape. Wow. But yeah, I think it reinforces the divide that's already there.
I'm unconvinced that legacy media is good at doing I've seen a lot of really, or it's very, very inside baseball.
Yeah, inside baseball and gotcha and yeah.
So but one thing I would just very, very, very quick tangent.
But a couple of fact checks would have been nice on some of these.
But a quick tangent off your Madison Square Garden. It is political malpractice by the Trump campaign not to be talking about high prices in the economy every day. That's their biggest advantage, and the fact that they're all over the map talking about transgender this or whatever went on over there. It seems to me when you have an advantage, people don't like high prices. I don't know. I don't.
But what does that tell you, the fact that they're not doing that?
I think it tells you that if he wins, it tells me that the campaigns and policies and get out the vote don't matter that much.
Yeah.
And I have to think differently about what elections are.
I think, well, can I offer that? I think that the power of racism and ethnic, you know, xenophobia and those things for some voters, you know, just obliterate any other issue, and they're so powerful it doesn't matter. And it's a part of our politics right now that these are front and center. These are mainstream issues. I know it's uncomfortable to say that out loud, but that's what was the topic of the Madison Square Garden, you know, whatever you want to call that, which was the Republican nominee. I think I would be remiss if we didn't, in the last few minutes, first of all, we have some audience members, first of all, and I also want to make sure that we leave a tiny bit of time to talk about what happens after November 5th. But let me open it up for the audience first before we get.
So I was thinking about the Yorba Linda School Board that you're talking about. I've been stuck on that this whole panel, just thinking about, you know, what happened and how almost random. I mean, again, just because we didn't have enough voter turnout. So what does that do? Because you talk about how California wasn't sending student teachers there, whatever. So then what happens in Yorba Linda? Does it just get worse and worse, or will there be a pendulum swing? Because people are going to be like, well, our kids aren't learning anything. I don't get it.
We'll find out on November 5th.
Right? I mean, you need 8 years to figure it out? Or?
No, but in 2020, one of the problems was candidates, political parties, and groups of interested voters not understanding the rules of the election.
Right.
Okay.
So there were multiple candidates, 4 candidates in a race. Splitting the vote allows an extremist to win.
Correct.
In 2024, when those extremists are back on the ballot, people have learned.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and the candidates that they've chosen aren't progressive liberals talking about wanting to do extreme things. You know, you have a nonpartisan, you have a veteran, you have, so you have 3 candidates who are saying, we would like to make Placentia Yorba Linda School District boring again. We would like to not have hours-long meetings. We would like to get back to what is best about Placentia Yorba Linda.
Okay.
And the voters have choice.
And I think the other thing is, once you've gone and been polarizing, you become the subject of the vote and the ballot. So, prior to, the election, the prior elections, basically nobody could name anybody on a school board. And that then worsened it. Yeah.
I think ignoring our city councils and school boards.
And the thing that leads to is, okay, whoever gets sort of the most yard signs, maybe has a better network nearby, largely has the advantage. It ends up also being whoever knocks the most doors. But it ends up being largely a bit of a sub rosa campaign. If you think about a lot of the exposure we have, a lot of local campaigns, it's vote for this person. Why? I don't know. Sign says. Literally, the sign just has their name. End of discussion. Now it's not that, because when you've been the subject of news, when PYL USD has been on CNN multiple times, the names of the incumbent candidates, at least, are known. So in 2 of these 3 districts, there are incumbents, one on the majority side and one on the other side. But I believe they bring that, there is a name recognition that simply didn't exist in other elections. So I think that's going to clear up the election results a little bit. It also leads to, once you have that, a little more, in a sense, polarized voting and behavior. So to take Leandra Blades, the chair of the board, her polarizing behavior leads to basically a focus on one challenge. So there's another challenge there, but the focus is on the one, because the, to quote Avengers, our strength might challenge, as Ultron's, not Ultron Vision said. The basic point being, it focuses the folks who are opposed to Leandra Blades and the majority into, in this case, the candidate named Misty Jansen. So it kind of clarifies things when you have that very polarizing figure. It polarizes, and that leads to the other candidates not doing well.
It also helps her.
Yeah.
Because there are people who don't really care about the school board, they're gonna vote for her. Because in their minds, she's in the same bucket as Trump, and that's overlap.
Yes.
I live in that district. My neighborhood is 70-30 Trump, for sure.
Yeah.
And who votes is not going to be a reflection, like the school age population is pretty diverse. The voting population is pretty old OC. So I wouldn't surprise me at all if she won.
Yeah, I would not be
I'm gonna be optimistic and point to Orange Unified, which also was highly polarized and ridiculous, and they recalled 2 of their school board members. So
there's been evidence that there's a backlash.
And if you live in
these.
Orange Unified, please Google Steve Rocco, who is a perennial candidate on the ballot and is deserving of a Google search.
To that point, why is there such little information on some of these like smaller elections? Because oftentimes for even judges and for these representatives, it's just a name, and you Google them and there's no picture in the bio, there's nothing about it, and like even for judges, like trying to figure out their history is so hard. So I think oftentimes people are like, well, just to be safe, I don't want to vote for the wrong person, so I'm just not gonna vote. How, like, why is there such little information?
Blame the founders of California and then later on the progressives for a little bit of that. They denied people the #1 source of information, namely putting a party label next to it. A lot of folks don't know how they're going to vote between Joe Schmo and Jane Schmo, but they do know how they're going to vote between Joe Schmo Democrat and Jane Schmo Republican. And so that piece of information, parties provide information. They tell me a lot of things. So you don't get that on our local elections. So thank you, founders of California, and then the progressives for doubling down on that. But in addition, the media really hurts. So our media are highly nationalized. When we're doing TikTok, Facebook, X, whatever, those are national media. They're not local. They're not localized.
Yeah.
But even then, local districts don't add up. So take OC Register. How is OC Register supposed to cover this? how many candidates are there for school board in Orange County? There's just too many to cover.
Yeah.
And so, even the OC Register, even if they were to cover the members of Congress, has 6 they have to pay attention to. That's still a good bit for a newspaper.
And
then
our
you
local
get to
newspapers are cutting their staff,
Yeah.
right, you know, and
you get to television. Your television here, your media market has 30 members of Congress. Whereas if you go to Kansas, on the other hand, for like a congressional district practically is the media market. When you have overlap of the media market and the unit of the politics, it really helps people get a lot more information because it gives them an economic incentive to cover that. But when there's not overlap, there's really no good incentive to them to cover. OC Register can be the most publicly devoted newspaper there is, but at the end of the day, they can't possibly afford enough reporters to cover all those races and putting it in there because it's going to be of interest to a small fraction of their readership.
Can I give you a slightly more conspiratorial?
No, I am here for it because I think
So have you
people
ever,
done.
wondered why you might have a local election randomly like on June 9th?
Oh, that's part of it.
So I think there's an incentive for local politicians, especially incumbents, to have low information and low turnout elections because that's the situation which they are most likely to win over and over and over. Because the people that know them and support them and their smaller network can carry the day. You don't want to expand that contest to a larger audience because who knows what happens if people start paying attention. So I think having a low information environment is actually a plus in favor of whatever group, however you want to define that, currently is running a particular part of OC. So for example, in Yorba Linda, where I live, everybody on the city council endorses each other and no one really talks about them, where they're from. And I mean, they're basically all the same persons. I don't think I have a lot of, they would probably deny that. But I think Democrat, Republican, equally to blame here. If you're in a kind of an incumbent sort of win situation, why change that?
I'm from a city of like less than 3,000. And that's, I can't find any of my candidate information. As hard as I tried looking at Facebooks and stuff, and I was like, I don't even know who you are. I don't know if you're a real person. But it says you're this person's name and you're a nurse. Cool. Why should I vote for you? No bio nothing. It's like,
So-
you have to fill out a bio when they like apply to be on the ballot.
So there are
Yes,
some
this is what-
places,
yeah.
so I will say, in the less conspiratorial, although I agree with everything you said. There are some places we have, Voice of OC that sends out candidate questionnaires. So for Orange County, I only cover North Orange County, because it's 3.2 million people, and that's a state. That's Iowa or Utah. So when we're talking about, trying to cover it all. So the Voice of OC sends out candidate questionnaires. You can find that. The League of Women Voters does an excellent job. And so in my other role, I am part of the League of Women Voters. We did 11 candidate forums for city council and school boards. Some, like Yorba Linda, doesn't have one. They let the Chamber of Commerce do it. So you can find them sometimes to find that out. La Habra, Brea, and Yorba Linda, the northernmost cities, still use at-large elections, and that matters, not just the dates, but also the election rules. And so incumbents have a huge advantage in those cities, and an advantage not to publicize much of anything because they have name recognition and they don't want to give oxygen to their challengers. And so, for instance, the North Orange County Community College District, we had a forum, only one person showed up. There are 6 candidates, 4 RSVP. We turned it into a town hall because the league doesn't do one-person events, but the other 10 forums that we had, there were clear differences between those candidates. And if you watched online, they're all recorded by the city or the school district, you could find that out. So Voice of OC, first stop, see if you can go to or watch a candidate forum. The Fullerton Observer does a really good job. And one of the things that is frustrating is, all of these good groups in California who have said, you have to give us financial disclosures. That has to be public information. then the city clerk uploads each page separately. I don't have
That's
time to go through all of those. And so my conspiracy is, are the incumbents telling them not to make it searchable? Are the incumbents not paying for what Royal Park uses, which is a searchable where I can look at the candidates to compare where they're getting money? Fullerton Observer goes through it. When you have journalists who will go through that, you then learn that Fred Jung, an incumbent, has $250,000 for a city council race, which is ridiculous to raise that much with 90% of it coming from outside of Fullerton. But I wouldn't know that because I don't have time to look at all of those. And he's an incumbent, so he's probably going to win. So all of these sorts of things that make it difficult when you don't have media, when you don't have local journalists. But the reason we all know, the reason the FBI came to town for Andrew Doe, the supervisor of Orange County, is because remember Nick Gerda, who worked for the Voice of OC, that went and worked for NPR at the LAS, and they have been covering it and covering it and covering it and covering it. Just came out today with a report that Michelle Steele also had some irregularities with how she spent COVID funding, which, by the way, future political science majors, public administration, there are dissertations galore to be written about the misspending of COVID dollars when you actually go over all of it. So there are some local media. There are some opportunities. Go to vote411.org. That's the League of Women Voters again. Candidates don't always fill out our questionnaires, but we ask them to. Ballotpedia to try to get information. Cal Matters covers the propositions in a minute, which is amazing. They have a lot. So there are journalists trying. But when we have media deserts, there's not a lot covering the Placentia or Belinda School District. And I don't know.
And by the way,
you
all
know,
of those,
250,000 subscriptions canceled of the Washington Post over the billionaire owners' blockage of the editorial. How many layoffs are going to be? How many layoffs are there going to be because of that?
but I will say something optimistic, which is to say that all of the different groups that you've talked about,
Yeah.
most of them have been emerged in the last 15 years.
League of Women Voters, but
Yeah.
The League of Women Voters emerged
No,
in
no,
1920
when
when women got the right to vote.
But our
Yes.
local, our
Voice of OC is a
online,
nonprofit.
right,
Yes.
Cal Matters,
Yes.
Wikipedia, right? There's
Yes.
more and more information that's quality as well as
Yes.
crap that's out there, and
Yes.
that's what I'm just trying to say.
and
There's a
people
flip
have
side
been
to this.
stepping up.
Yeah.
Because of California's
Yeah.
media desert in various ways.
Yeah. But I think that's probably happening in other places too. I'll take a couple more questions. Jessica.
So I, kind of going back to, I know that we talked about so many people have already voted and they have those votes, but, and this might be a really stupid question.
Nope.
But why haven't they reported on those results yet?
State law. So you generally, for I think good reasons, you don't report the votes that are already cast because it could change how people are voting. So you report the first day and you go, oh my God, Trump has an 80-20 win. This is a laugher. That's 4-1. I mean, right? So that's 5 people voted. So you don't want to do it because you don't want it to sort of color the results, as it were. So there's that. However, states vary in the degree to which they allow how much you can line up those and pre-count them but not report it. So for example, I think Virginia, one of the reasons we're going to see those results early is those early votes are in, counted, verified, banked. They're ready to go. They're tallied, they're just not reporting the tally yet. California, what they allow them to do is they open the absentee ballots, so all the ones you dropped off and thing, they've been scanned, you've got your confirmation, they line them up, they do a check. I know this is Orange County, there's most of the counties. They actually will scan it, make sure it doesn't have any error, make sure it doesn't need curing, check the signature. They get all of that stuff in a row, but they don't do any pre-tallying. So if you go to the OC Registrar of Voters, they have a cage where they have all the ballots lined up, ready to count them, and put them in the machine to count them. But they are not counted. They've gone through a pre-count audit process. That's California. one of the reasons California is so slow to do it. The other reason is massively high vote by mail compared to other states.
And we
Another
have
response here.
ballots that are postmarked on Tuesday.
So they have to
For
wait.
those of us who would like to know the results, if you vote late, please take your ballot to a drop box where it will be collected. If you put it in the mail, it takes a few days. And California allows postmarked by Tuesday, and so sometimes we're waiting for ballots to arrive.
Though I will say the Postal Service does prioritize
They do.
The delivery of ballots.
There is incomplete and dangerous, I'll say it in a second, information in many states. You don't know what people voted,
Yes.
but you know who voted. And if their party registration is public, and in a lot of states it is, you can get percentages of, say, what percentage of votes that have come in are Democrat versus Republican versus Independent. Couple challenges with that. One, we don't know for sure that a Democrat voted for Harris or a Republican voted for Trump. Probably, but small differences could decide the election. The other thing is you don't know what percentage of people are still going to show up to cancel, right? So if Democrats have a lead in Pennsylvania, is that going to be canceled out any day, any way on election day? So that, as far as motivated reasoning goes, early voting kind of information, everybody thinks they know exactly what it means and talks about it. And what I tell my students is no one knows nothing. That's probably not true, but it's truer than trying to read the tea leaves. Because with 2020 being weird, Nevada is different than Pennsylvania, is different than Michigan. So you might find someone really reliable that can tell you like this is better for this party, but I just basically told myself I'm not going to look at it because I don't know what to say.
And we used to be really good at it in California because absentee voting was one way for decades and it was reliable. It had this skew to it. You knew the color was going to shift things. It'd be this many points that direction. And then COVID plus universal mailing of ballots plus automatic voter registration has really changed that game. So changes, and then COVID has changed this for all around the country. There are people in states that didn't have absentee voting that have some form of it now, and it's sort of a brave new world. We really can't do very good projections on this. We've really had one race, and it was during COVID, so we really can't compare it. We're in sort of new territory for 24.
Yeah.
So those decision desks, I imagine we are not going to have a call on election night. Even if they could theoretically do it, I think they're going to be real gun shy because of all these changes. They're just not going to know. So they're going to play it real safe.
Well, that's a really good segue into what happens then on November 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. You know, the rules are that by December the 11th, that all the states have to issue certificates of ascertainment for the governor of each of the states, which have to, right? And immediately after that, the vote is certified in that state. And then December 17th, the electors have to vote in their respective state capitals. Every elector, one vote for the president, one vote for the vice president. And then again, at that point, certificates of the vote are prepared. And then on December 25th, on Christmas, the certificates of the vote and the certificates of ascertainment must be delivered. Both of those have to be delivered to the Archivist of the United States and to the President of the Senate, Chuck Schumer. And on or before January 3rd, the Archivist transfers that set of certificates to the brand new Congress, whoever that is. We don't know who that is yet. And then on January 6th, yes, it's still going to be on January 6th, 2025, Congress is going to actually count the Electoral College votes based on those certificates of the vote. And the Vice President of the United States is going to preside over that. So we're going to see Vice President Kamala Harris presiding over the outcome of the election on January 6th. Which used to be, like, people didn't even know this because until the 2020 election became an insurrection on January 6th. So what are your thoughts about how this process is going to go between now and then, right? That's the formal process. Any thoughts about?
Worse than 2022, but not as bad as 2020. But
I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know. I do expect, definitely an increased, level of what I would call low levels of political violence. So the United States was fortunate for a large portion of our more recent history, older, it's not as true, but you don't have photos in American newspapers of people who are bloody because they got beat, up by somebody else at the polling place. There will be stories on election day, on election night. Some of them will be fake and some of them will be real, of people who were subject to violence, on election day. In the days after, there will likely be, simmering down to that, some of it. I think that if Trump wins, you are likely to see, or if it looks like Trump is winning through the sort of early parts of November, you are likely to see large-scale protests, in most of your major cities. And I think those will continue on up through and including election day. Inauguration day.
Inauguration.
If I would not be at all surprised to see phalanxes of riot police in this case. Large numbers of people being arrested on inauguration day. Some damage to federal buildings. If Trump, that's if Trump wins. If Kamala Harris wins, that violence is likely to be higher. There will be the occasional FBI branch that will be subject to actual bombing. Numerous of them will be subject to bomb threats. If you look at the United States currently on what we call the polity scale, ranks countries on whether or not they're a democracy, -10 to +10, we're not a 10. We never were electoral college, Senate, things of that nature, but we're scored awfully close to zero, the lower numbers. It's not good. There are surveys of, there's a survey called the Bright Line Watch, surveys political scientists. We're scared, folks.
Yeah.
We are not this. I keep saying to folks that political scientists are Cassandra. We have been telling people to be worried and nobody's been listening to us. We're freaked out. And then I don't know what inauguration day is, 21st, 22nd. It varies on the year.
I think it's the 20th.
Yeah, it varies on the years. That's set by the day of the week. Whatever the day after that is, if it's Trump, I just have no promises. I just have no idea how bad it is. For a man who promised he said he wouldn't be a dictator except on day one. I don't know what day one looks like.
The one difference I will say that I will remind people is that Joe Biden's the president right now, and he's very, very unlikely. I mean, 0.0 chance that there'll be a presidentially stimulated insurrection on January 6th, and that the vote count itself will be protected by the United States government, by the Department of Justice, the FBI, et cetera, even if there are threats. I agree with Matt that we're likely to see lots of anger and boiling over into violence. There'll be a lot of lawsuits. I mean, that's already started right now. And who knows how long those things are going to go until, it could be several years before we get full resolution of all the different lawsuits back and forth about the vote count in Pennsylvania or the vote count in Wisconsin or whatever it might be. But for sure, I couldn't agree with you more than that as political scientists, I'm concerned, very, very concerned about the health of our democracy. And I feel like the election process itself is under a cloud of fear that is gripping the entire country, that is present in the media coverage, it's all kinds of media coverage, left, right, center, misinformation even, but it's all filtered through with an overriding sense of fear that we are failing as a country to come up with, to live up to our ideals as a democracy. And yet, we're having an election. We are still having elections, lots of them. And we don't know who's going to win, right? It's not like, you know, when democracy is dead, we know who won. It doesn't matter, like they can say there's an election in Russia, but we know Putin's gonna win. But here, we don't know who's gonna win. And that's a real thing. And neither candidate, even Donald Trump, will say that he doesn't know. I mean, he will say that he knows he's gonna win, but he doesn't really know. And so I think there's still a chance for those of you who are voting and haven't voted yet to exercise that right. So please do.
Yeah. I think the chances of the wheels coming off are pretty low. But if you told me I had a pretty low chance of dying tomorrow, I'd still worry. I think the bigger concern for me is not so much that like day one, like something with Trump is like the end, although different people will face different costs to society depending on who wins. It's just more that everything is kind of degrading. So backsliding is the word we use in literature. And as long as we're really polarized, it's difficult to overcome because the logic tends to be no matter how bad the person I'm supporting is, I like them more than the other party. And that breaks the link between accountability and voting. Doesn't matter what they do, it's who they are. And that's poisonous.
And I think one of the biggest things that I'm worried about is how, particularly because these most red states come in first and Trump will say he won regardless of how little we know at that time. And that will start the wheels. I'm probably closer to Matt in terms of being worried about.
You said stop the count in 2020.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And some of it will depend on the margin of victory.
Yes.
If it is close for either of them, it is easier to see protests and lawsuits that everyone believes will be determined. The bigger the margin on either side, the harder that it's the decentralized nature of our elections makes it harder to hack. And you know, we've seen that. And so it is more determinative if all of the swing states go for one candidate. And the popular vote as well. It's overwhelming margin, even though that's not how we count votes. But I do agree that I mean, we have seen political violence for voting in the civil rights and lynching day, and a number of people saw intimidation for decades and decades before. But for what we kind of see as this, you know, political troubles, you know, we're not divided like the Civil War. I think it's more Northern Ireland that, you know, Gretchen Whitmer as governor of Michigan faces a kidnapping and possible death threat. Gabby Giffords has an assassination attempt where people have died. You know, you can go back to the Oklahoma, you know, bombing of white supremacists wanting political outcomes. We've kind of become inert. I mean, I don't remember Steve Scalise shot at the congressional baseball game, and I kind of have to trigger my memory of people took shots at that. We've had, you know, assassination attempts in this cycle.
It's a little niche, but for me, the best analogy is like 1967, where the communists and the fascists took shots at each other while everyone else tried to avoid being shot.
Yeah.
So I guess could somebody say, you know, on the other side of this election, no matter what happens, are there any opportunities for meaningful and pivotal reform for the health of everybody? Do you see what I'm saying? Like some reasonable people have to be having those conversations so that, you know, a couple of people in 7 swing states don't carry the fate of the entire world on their neck. I mean, what can be done?
Well, you bring up this issue of the electoral college, which Shelley was mentioning, which I think is a really important thing. I mean, is this some crazy way to run a democracy. You know, I mean, there is some talk that the compact, what's the name of the act, where
The National Popular Vote Compact.
Yes, might be, we might be getting close to getting that passed, in which if enough states with a majority of the electoral college vote agreed to being part of this compact, they would all agree to vote, to have their electoral college vote for whoever the popular vote winner is nationally.
Yeah.
So,
Which is not a reason not to do it.
Go ahead and say, Rob,
The Supreme Court might strike that down.
as violating the Constitution.
I mean, so I have an optimistic and a pessimistic answer to the question. I'll try to be short. The optimistic vision is if you look at something like civil rights, which much harder road to hoe than anything we're facing from their situation. They give up, they persevered, they won. It took decades, lots of lives, whatever. If you want to look at it from like a Republican perspective, look at the pro-life movement. Focus, 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 focus. 5 decades, they won. So the optimistic view is you put pressure on candidates to do the things that you really care about, you prioritize, you only vote for those people, and you accept it's going to be a long grind, and you fight. The pessimistic view is nothing gets fixed until it fatally breaks. And then when it breaks badly, the in-your-face nature of how bad things are overcomes polarization.
So I'm a bit of a political malfoozy, and I'm sort of in that second camp, particularly because what we need to fix the rules. And the rules are, and what I know about every single person elected to Congress is they got elected under the existing rules. Every person got elected under the existing rules. Electoral college, as far as I'm concerned, is almost electoral smallage. It does matter, it's not great, but the list of two-party countries that have persisted as democracies is very, very short. It is the United States, Jamaica, and Malta, and I wouldn't call Jamaica and Malta countries that would actually go, ooh, I want to copy their government. We're basically the only two-party democracy that's still standing and functioning. There's a reason. It's not a good system because you have a lot of folks holding their nose to vote for Trump or to vote for Harris. That's not the way to do this.
So what is the way?
Some kind of proportional representation.
So,
Like a parliamentary system?
Yeah, parliamentary system, various ways of how tallying the vote that can get you to that, but it takes the elected officials to vote for a system that's not in their interest.
you'd have to amend the Constitution under the two-party system with the current rules.
It sounds like throwing it out. I mean,
No,
We threw out the first one.
Yeah, I wasn't sure it, but.
the Constitution doesn't say we have to have single-member districts for Congress.
No,
It doesn't.
that doesn't say anything about parties.
Yeah, the only thing it says about parties is the 12th Amendment, which says the electoral college will be party-based, because they had a couple after that, they realized, oh shoot, it was great guys, that's not good. So but the parties are not in the Constitution. That actually makes it easier to fix. Congress can pass some laws, but really it's going to come down to states. States would have to do it too, because of the Constitution leaving election, the time, place, and manner of elections up to the states. The states have a say in this too. So that's part of the problem. So if you amend that little part of the Constitution, it would be easier.
Well, I will say we could continue this conversation for a long time. I can feel it. And I feel like this is in the middle of the conversation, but I know we've run over our time. So
What about the ballot measures? I thought you were gonna talk about the ballot.
No,
We did that
Sarah,
2 weeks ago.
I'll
Yeah, I
give you
think
a break.
the biggest thing to say is go vote.
Go vote.
Please
Yes.
go out and vote and make sure you're educated on voting and don't just vote because that's how your friend voted. Vote.
And vote for what you know. You don't have to vote for every single thing. And so you can vote for what you know and turn in your ballot.
And for those of you who are interested in the propositions, Dr. Sarah Hill did a beautiful, very clear and full accounting for all the different propositions, much more clearly than we would do. And you can watch it at Cal State Bulletin's alumni YouTube channel.
Where you're
on our
watching
YouTube
this.
channel. Where you're watching this. There's a great one. So check that one out before you vote.
Right.
This was so good.